Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's Facebook Live chat. I'm your host, Katie Chen. A nationwide shortage of baby formula is creating empty store shelves and raising questions among parents about how to provide babies with proper nutrition. Joining me today is Dr. Shweta Namjoshi. She is the Medical Director of Intestinal Rehabilitation and Nutrition Support and the Children's Home Pharmacy. She's here to address concerns and offer guidance to families who may be experiencing an urgent situation. Dr. Namjoshi, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Katie.
So just to start off with, what can expectant mothers do to best prepare themselves to breastfeed?
We have a ton of resources here at Stanford and at Packard. And if we're able to, we can drop maybe some links for our group. The last thing you want to be doing the first week when you bring a new baby home is trying to make a plan for things like pumps, lactation support, and really getting your house and your home and your family ready to support you. I know when I was a new mother, it was really important to me that all I did was sleep and breastfeed. It was very challenging. And I say that kind of laughing because I think breastfeeding is not something just that the parent who is breastfeeding does. It's really something that the community and the family and everyone in the home really has to support. So I think buy some nice water bottles. I think keeping one like in your room, in the living room, and maybe if you have a nursery in the baby's area, that's really helpful, staying hydrated. Get yourself a pump just in case you need it. Sometimes it takes weeks for your milk to really come in. And so we've got some resources that we can drop in the chat to help you find an affordable pump. These pumps are covered by health insurance as well. And so I think that's a really important message is like, you don't have to do this alone. There's a lot of support. There are lactation consultants and we have some links available. There are folks who are available Monday through Friday, either in person or by telehealth. And so those are some of the resources locally that we can offer. And then there are after hours resources as well. There are many local community partners who really want to support your breastfeeding journey. It's very, very challenging, but it's doable with a lot of support. And so great. I think making that plan before you have your baby is great. The last thing you want to do is like run for a pump like day 4. It's not fun.
So if you were to break it down in terms of what should be included in a plan, obviously the community and family support is super important, but what are the top things that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, so I think probably the first thing is really setting expectations for breastfeeding. It's okay if it's not perfect. In fact, most infant and mom dyads take about 4 to 6 weeks before you really see sort of a good flow of milk and before you really have the feeling like, okay, I got this, right? I remember with my daughter, it took almost 8 weeks and I felt constantly insufficient at that time, even though I wasn't. So I think number one is really just knowing that it takes time and have that expectation that it won't be perfect for the first couple weeks of life. 2, having that pump already in your house is super important. If it's 2 in the morning, you don't want to be like running around trying to find a breast pump. And so the pump, even though the baby is sort of the best pump is what we say, the pump is a nice supplement to try to get your supply up so that your body knows that you need to make more milk. And so anywhere between the 1st to 6 weeks of life, a pump in between feeds can be really helpful to stimulate supply. And then just knowing like you are enough, your supply is not probably low, you really just need to give it a little bit of time. And then always knowing that, we have formula to support if you need it. Yeah.
So speaking of formula, for parents who need to use formula for their babies, where do they go if they go into their local store and the shelves are empty?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to acknowledge how terrifying that feels, but I think there's not reason to panic when you see that. There are resources available to try to find formula to feed your baby. And again, with so much sympathy for families who are looking to feed their kids right now, this is a systems issue, and I hope that there are system solutions. But while we're waiting for those system solutions and really advocating for them in Congress, families can go to their pediatricians as a great first stop. Many pediatricians' offices have formula samples, so that's an easy place to try to obtain supply, but they're also really connected to your local community. Nobody knows your community better than your pediatrician, and they also know how to connect you with resources in the community. For example, WIC offices that also have lactation support, formula supply, and other connections to smaller pharmacies. So for example, if you go to a large commercial retailer and you don't see formula on the shelf, there might be a local pharmacy or a local supplier that has supply. And so your pediatrician, I think, is the first best place to start. They can also weigh your baby, check your baby, and make sure that, and take a really good history to see if intake is actually enough or not. And so those are some ways that a pediatrician can help troubleshoot in the immediate and sort of also long-term guiding conversations as your baby grows as to how much formula do they actually need? Can they start transitioning to solids? When can they start transitioning to more toddler feeding? So I would say go to your pediatrician. We want to help.
That's really good advice and super helpful. What if parents, are thinking, okay, I don't see my brand on the store shelves. Can they switch brands? Is that okay?
Yes. So this is actually one of the most reassuring things. I know as a mom, I was really fixated on, I want this one brand of formula because it was what I had hoped for and what I thought was a best fit. But I do want to provide parents reassurance that within a certain category, the brand is really not that important and your baby will be okay. So I think there are sort of 4 major categories of formula. So there's what we call term infant formulas. And within that category, the brand really doesn't matter. Despite what the marketing kind of might make it seem, they more or less use very, very similar fat, sugar, and protein, calcium, minerals, and vitamins, all sort of the same. They all sort of mimic breast milk. And so within that term infant formula category, you can feel pretty safe switching brands. There are some exceptions, if you've got an allergy, talk to your pediatrician about that. And then the second category is what we call kind of hydrolyzed formulas. These are where the milk protein is broken down into smaller parts called peptides. Within that same category, there's about 3 options. And within that category, it's safe to switch. That was one of the categories that was really hit hard by some of the shortages. And so that's actually the category that might be the hardest to find. And so it's reassuring that within that category, you can switch and have those conversations with your WIC dietitian or your pediatrician. And then there's 2 more categories of formula. One is the extensively broken down or elemental formulas. Those are really for kids with severe allergies and a couple other medical conditions, and then more medical specialty formulas. Those might be really hard to obtain. And if your child is on one of those formulas, definitely talk to your pediatrician because they'll be able to get you hooked up with the right resources. But even in those categories, there's a little wiggle room.
It's good to know. Should parents be stocking up on formula right now?
So I think with so many COVID-related supply chain issues, we've seen sort of the side effects of kind of hoarding supplies of various things. And so I would say take what you think your baby needs, right? And no more. The other part of this is like, even though it seems like, especially in those first couple of months, that your baby's going to feed this way forever, they will grow, they will start to eat solids and actually rely on formula less and less. Especially between 6 to 12 months, children really start utilizing what we call complementary foods or just solid foods, right? Fruits, vegetables, grains, proteins. And so they may not need as much as you think. And so I don't recommend sort of stockpiling formula. I think if you have a child with medical nutrition needs, those are going to be prescribed by your pediatrician or your GI doctor and dietitian and sent to you on a regular basis through these specialty pharmacies. So that's sort of a different situation.
Should parents also be aware of the expiration dates on those cans of formula? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So all these formulas do have an expiration date on the can. I think I hope that it doesn't come down to having to use expired formula. But what I really recommend against is diluting formula, right? So never try to make your formula go or last longer. Don't try to stretch it thin. If it came down to using an expired formula versus a regular formula, or diluting formula, that would be a conversation to have with your pediatrician, but hopefully we will get more supply very soon.
Speaking of diluting formula, there's also been a lot of talk about making your own formula at home. Some people have said, oh, I found this recipe online. Is this something that is recommended?
So I don't recommend making your own formula, and I really recommend against diluting formula. So like I said, formulas are formalized to mimic breast milk. And a lot of the recipes that have been floating around on social media and other outlets do not provide adequate nutrition for infants. And especially for infants between 0 and 6 months, this is a critical time for brain growth, organ development, and calories really equate to nutrition at that time. But it's not just the quantity of calories, it's the quality of the protein, the fat, the vitamins, and the minerals that are in there. So from a nutrition perspective, these formulas and these recipes are very different. The recipes don't really provide adequate nutrition that really helps babies thrive. And then there are some things that can be dangerous. So without going into a ton of detail and nitty-gritty TMI about each ingredient, there are aspects of each ingredient that can be very unsafe for infants. So don't make your own formula. It's much safer to have a conversation with your pediatrician about the safest ways to find an alternative.
What about milk alternatives like soy milk or almond milk? Is that okay to use?
So it really depends on the age of the child. So after about 12 to 15 months, we are able to transition most sort of early toddler age children to some type of milk. Dairy milk has a lot of calcium, good source of fat for brain development and phosphorus. And so we do recommend switching to cow's milk, like somewhere between 12 to 15 months. At that time, you can also use dairy alternatives. Ripple milk or oat milks that have enough calcium and that's a bit more bioavailable are good alternatives. And so those are good conversations to also have with your pediatrician. We do not recommend any dairy milk or alternative milk under the age of really 10 to 12 months because it really doesn't meet your child's nutrition needs. And that milk protein exposure before 9 to 10 months is really not appropriate, can lead to mucus or blood in the stool and other sort of allergy type issues. And so we don't recommend that.
Another thing I've been seeing a lot online too has been the question around toddler formula. Is that safe for babies?
So toddler formula is much more concentrated than infant formula. And so we don't recommend that for infants. It can be really hard on a baby's intestines. And so I would not try to use a toddler formula for an infant. There can be certain circumstances where your pediatrician can guide you in potentially using other alternative formulas for your infant. And so just have those conversations either with your pediatrician or with a dietitian.
We've also seen a lot of news recently about, the government getting shipments of formula from Europe. Also, parents wondering if they are really desperate, can they use formulas from Europe or places like Canada? Yeah. Is that something safe to do?
That's a really good question. So really, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, the FDA has actually changed mechanisms for sort of monitoring and regulating imported formula. And so I would say, 2 weeks ago, most of the imported formula options were really not regulated. So we really couldn't make comment about their safety or nutrition content. But moving forward, the FDA does seem to have a mechanism to help boost domestic supply. And so we can look at the FDA website links about which formulas there are. And I think we can maybe drop those in the chat as well, about which options are available to folks in the United States.
If parents are looking to, either purchase donated breast milk, or how do they qualify to even get breast milk for their babies if they, can't find formula?
Yeah. So donor breast milk does rely on a donor bank, right? And so some of the requirements vary with supply. And so what I would recommend families do, and I think we've got some links that we can drop in the chat, is to check with the milk banks to see what their supply is like and what the criteria for obtaining donor milk are. Sometimes when supply is really high, those criteria are relaxed. Sometimes when supply is very low, it's more restricted to children with more medical needs. And so I would encourage families to just check with the milk bank to see if they can qualify.
Very good. What if someone, has been breastfeeding and, wants to help out? What's the best way that she can pump and donate milk?
So directly contacting the milk bank is the best way. I don't really recommend that families sort of exchange breast milk just at home. And the main reason for that is you can transmit certain breast milk pathogens through breast milk. And the milk banks are trained at screening and making sure that the milk is safe. And so if you're interested in being either a donor or a recipient for breast milk, I encourage you to go through the milk banks.
How critical is it, if let's say someone can help out, how critical is it for someone to be donating breast milk at this time?
I think that if you are somebody who has a high milk supply and you're interested in donating, I think it's just such a valuable resource. There are so many benefits to consuming breast milk, and infants really benefit. And so if you're able to do that, it's such a tremendous community service. Again, not putting pressure as a new mom to do anything above and beyond what you're able to do and sort of what's in the realm of your own wellness. But if you're able to and you have a really high supply, that's a wonderful thing to do to support our community at this time.
There's also been some talk, I think on social media, some folks have been like, well, breastfeeding is free. Do you mind discussing that a little bit?
Yeah.
It might not be an option for everybody.
Yeah, that's so this is a really important thing to talk about, I think. Breastfeeding is not free. I want to make that really, really clear. Breastfeeding is labor that is done by the breastfeeding parent, and it takes time. When I was breastfeeding my child, it took 12 to 18 hours of my day. It takes money, the supplies and other resources that are used. So the pump, the tubes, the flanges, if you're pumping, the bottles, the cleaning supplies, the time to wash the bottles and sterilize the nipples, all of those things cost money. And it is slightly, quote unquote, cheaper than formula. When you look, there are studies that have looked at sort of the price of both methods of feeding children. But it's not free. It comes at tremendous emotional and physical labor. And so I think it's only free if, as a society, we say we don't value a breastfeeding parent's time or a breastfeeding parent's labor. And so I really, first of all, want to just say, if you are breastfeeding your child, you're doing a great job. Keep at it. It's so hard, and it's really valuable labor. It's not free. And for families who say, hey, breastfeeding is really too expensive for me, I can't afford to do it. There's a lot of really valid reasons for that. As a society, a lot of families, there's an equity issue around this, right? A lot of families don't have time off of work. A lot of families don't have a safe space where they can feel comfortable pumping at work. And a lot of parents have to go back to work because they can't afford to take 6 to 12 months off. And so when we say breastfeeding is free, I think that we need to be really mindful of the cost to families and working parents. The other thing I'll say about that is it is cost saving to society. There is a lot of data that suggests that breastfeeding saves society a lot of money, but may not be saving individuals a lot of money. So if you're breastfeeding, again, kudos to you. If you wanted to breastfeed and you weren't able to, that's okay. It's really important to know that you're a great parent, no matter what method you choose to feed your baby, whether it's formula or breast milk.
Going back to the formula, just in case some folks are joining us right now, do you mind talking about some of the do's and don'ts during this infant formula shortage?
Yes, absolutely. So I think some of the do's, and we've talked a little bit about different categories of formula. So there's sort of 4 main categories. So there's medical specialty formulas, there's elemental, hydrolyzed, and sort of term infant formulas. And then there's like a pediatric or older than 1 year old version of all of those formulas. So within the same category, a do is it's okay to switch within that same category and have a conversation with your pediatrician just to double check that that's okay. There are slight ingredient variations, and if you've got a child with allergies, you want to pass that by your pediatrician or a dietitian to be on the safe side. But for the most part, within a category, it's okay to switch. It's also okay to switch brand to generic. There's very minimal, negligible differences between all of these within that same category. So that's a do, is definitely use an alternative product. A don't is never dilute formula. It can be really dangerous. It can lead to problems with low salt in the blood, for example. I know early in the stages of this shortage, we had some children who were actually admitted to the hospital because of diluting and sort of experimentation kind of gone wrong. So I really recommend against that. And then don't use cow's milk under the age of 1 year. And really try to avoid using milk that's outside of a milk bank.
Gotcha. What about, let's say someone wants to see if, they want to introduce solid foods at one point. Is that okay to do with babies?
Yeah. So this is one of the topics I love talking with families about, because it's just really beautiful to watch children learn to eat. So children are really, really skilled at understanding what feels good to them. And so most infants, but somewhere between 5 and 6 months, will start being interested in learning how to eat. And so we sort of take the baby's cues and baby's their signal on how to eat. So we think around somewhere between 5 to 7 months, most children should be starting to taste and try solid foods. When we say solid, we really mean a texture that's safe to swallow. So this is stuff like purees mostly, or lumpy purees. And then somewhere between 7 to 9 months, and there's going to be variation baby to baby, even within one family, just because one sibling fed at 5 months and another fed at 9 months, that's okay. That's pretty normal. So somewhere between 7 to 9 months, we think babies are maybe less reliant on formula, maybe 50% of calories from formula or breast milk and 50% from solids. And then that learning process continues into early toddlerhood. Our goal is somewhere around a year that they're more relying on solids than they are on liquids for their nutrition. So that kind of translates to about 2 to 3 cups of milk per day when you're, somewhere older than 1, whereas when you're around 6 months, you're still mostly breast milk or formula dependent.
Gotcha. So what I'm hearing is parents definitely should not try to stretch their supply by introducing solid foods too early.
Yeah, I think it really depends on your baby. Most infants are not developmentally ready prior to 4 months to safely swallow. And that can be a choking hazard, right? Especially if your baby cannot sit in a chair and can't hold their head up. It's not only a choking risk, it's just not pleasurable, right? We want food and feeding to be fun. Nobody really wants to eat when their head is sort of not capable of holding their head up. So I think it's really important to do things in a manner that's sort of baby-centered. Sometimes as parents, we want to do things that our children may not be ready to do. So taking the baby's cues and then making sure you're using safe swallowable textures, and then advancing those textures as the baby shows cues.
So if parents are using formula, how do they know if their particular brand of formula was recalled and that they need to, maybe go find an alternative?
Yeah, great question. So by now, most of the retailers that dispense the formula, whether that was a commercial or a smaller pharmacy, have sent notices to families. based on specific lot numbers and other types of specifics. There's also a link that we can drop in the chat from the company that had most of the recall issues. And so you can check to see which formulas were involved and if the formula that you have at home has been implicated in the recall.
Great. And then again, just to reiterate for the audience that if they do need to switch within a brand, switch their brand because of the recall, it's switching within that certain category is safe.
Yeah, exactly.
Great. Any other do's and don'ts that you would like to share with the audience?
I think that, we put a lot of responsibility on young families, and this is a systems issue. And so I think it's really important to make your voice as parents heard. Let your representatives and your congressmen know that you care about infant nutrition and that you think that every child deserves access to the critical nutrition they need. There's a lot of work that the North American Society for Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Nutrition have been doing on this topic. The American Academy of Pediatrics has also been really advocating for children for actually many months and years to prevent this crisis and to help speed up its resolution. So if you can make your voice heard, I think that's a really important do. And again, I think I can't emphasize enough just the importance of having a conversation with your pediatrician. Your pediatrician will never shame you, will never judge you for any of the decisions that you're making to feed your child. We only want to make sure that your child gets to grow, is kindergarten ready, and gets the best start in their early infant life. We can guide you on how to switch formulas, even other alternative strategies that really do require medical guidance. And again, really discouraging people from diluting or trying to stretch formula, making their own formula. Those things can be very unsafe.
Well, it looks like we've really covered all of our questions. Is there any other additional guidance? I mean, what you just said summarized it perfectly, but is there anything else that you would like to, share with our audience before we go?
I guess I just wanted to say that I really feel for families. This is a really challenging time to be a parent, but you're doing a fantastic job. I promise you're doing a better job than you think you are. So hang in there. Things will get better. Rely on your pediatrician, rely on WIC. We all want to help.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Namjoshi. Really appreciate all of the tips that you've provided for parents during this, what may be a difficult time for some. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you. Have a good one.